What if the most dangerous secret in the Sahel was not moving across the desert, but hiding beneath the ground? Burkina Faso is once again at the center of a shocking security question. Reports sympathetic to the Burkinabe authorities claim that the army has uncovered a secret tunnel linked to cross-border supply routes near the frontier with Côte d'Ivoire. This information has not yet been independently verified. And that point matters. But if it is confirmed, then this discovery could change the way many people understand the war against armed groups in the region. Because this would not simply be about a tunnel, it would be about a system. For years, many people have asked the same question. How do armed groups continue to receive weapons, ammunition, fuel, food, money, and new fighters? Even after repeated military operations, how can they disappear after attacks, then return again with fresh supplies? How can pressure increase on the battlefield, while their logistical lifeline still seems to survive? That is why this alleged tunnel matters. In every war, the fighter at the front is only the visible part of the problem. Behind him there is a road, a supplier, a financier, a protector, and sometimes an entire network that wants the conflict to continue. If you believe Africa deserves to know every side of the story, follow this channel and stay with us, because this analysis goes beyond rumors and emotions. Today, we will look at what this alleged discovery means, why logistics may be more important than the battlefield itself, how cross-border networks can weaken a country from the inside, and why Captain Ibrahim Traore sees the struggle in Burkina Faso as a fight for sovereignty, dignity, and the future of the Sahel. As the reports continue to circulate, one question becomes impossible to ignore. Why would anyone invest so much effort into building a hidden supply route unless it served a strategic purpose? Once again, it is important to stress that no independent public evidence has yet confirmed the existence of such a tunnel. Yet, even as a hypothesis, it forces us to examine how modern insurgencies survive. Military historians often say that wars are won or lost through logistics before they are won or lost on the battlefield. An army without ammunition cannot fight. A vehicle without fuel cannot move. A commander without communication cannot coordinate an operation, whether the fighters are regular soldiers or armed groups. The same principle applies. Every bullet fired on the front line has already traveled through a chain of transportation, financing, storage, and distribution. This is why analysts increasingly focus not only on those carrying weapons, but also on the invisible networks that keep those weapons flowing. If a hidden route existed, it would represent far more than an engineering project. It would suggest planning, resources, local knowledge, and long-term organization. Understanding the geography helps explain why the issue remains so sensitive. The border between Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire stretches for nearly 600 kilometers across forests, savannas, isolated villages, and long-established trading paths. Even with modern surveillance technology, monitoring every crossing point every hour of every day is an enormous challenge. Criminal trafficking, illegal gold mining, fuel smuggling, and unauthorized trade have existed in parts of this region for years, creating routes that can potentially be exploited by armed groups as well. For the Alliance of Sahel States, known as AES, border security has therefore become more than a military objective. It has become a question of national survival, from the perspective of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Defeating armed groups requires more than successful operations against fighters. It also requires identifying and disrupting every possible supply network that allows violence to continue across national borders. If supply routes are the lifeline of every armed movement, then the next question becomes even more important. Where do those supplies actually come from? Security experts studying the Sahel have identified several well-documented sources of financing that allow armed groups to maintain their operations. Illegal gold mining has become one of the most profitable activities in conflict zones, generating significant revenue outside official government control. Smuggling networks transport fuel, consumer goods, and weapons across porous borders, while kidnapping for ransom and extortion continue to provide additional financial resources. These activities create an underground economy capable of sustaining violence long after military victories appear to have been achieved. This broader context explains why discussions about an alleged tunnel have attracted so much attention. Even if investigators ultimately reach different conclusions about this specific report, the larger challenge remains unchanged. Armed groups rarely survive through isolated attacks alone. They depend on systems of finance, transportation, communication, recruitment, and logistics that often extend far beyond a single battlefield. That reality has led many supporters of Burkina Faso's current security strategy to ask a difficult question. If military operations eliminate one armed group today, but the financial and logistical networks remain untouched, will another group simply emerge tomorrow, using the same infrastructure? This is precisely why Captain Ibrahim Traore and other leaders within the Alliance of Sahel states frequently emphasize the need to dismantle entire support networks rather than focusing only on frontline combat. Their argument is that lasting security cannot be achieved by chasing individual fighters while leaving untouched the routes that move weapons, ammunition, fuel, and money across the region. Whether those networks operate through remote roads, hidden forest paths, criminal trafficking routes, or other clandestine methods, the strategic objective remains the same: interrupt the flow of supplies, and even the strongest armed organization eventually loses its ability to sustain prolonged conflict. Captain Ibrahim Traore has repeatedly argued that the security crisis in Burkina Faso cannot be separated from the broader question of national sovereignty. In his view, terrorism is not simply a collection of isolated attacks carried out by scattered armed groups. It is a challenge that survives because it is supported by financial networks, illegal trafficking, cross-border movements, and the weakness of state institutions. Whether one fully agrees with this assessment or not, it has become a defining feature of his leadership. Since assuming power, Traore has placed military self-reliance at the center of his strategy. Rather than depending primarily on foreign military missions, he has promoted the expansion of Burkina Faso's own defense capabilities while strengthening cooperation with Mali and Niger through the Alliance of Sahel states. Supporters argue that this regional partnership reflects the reality that armed groups do not recognize national borders, making isolated responses far less effective than coordinated action. From this perspective, reports of a possible hidden supply route fit into a much larger narrative. If logistical networks can move fighters, weapons, fuel, or resources across borders without detection, then protecting sovereignty requires more than winning battles. It requires identifying every link in the chain that allows instability to persist. At the same time, critics of Traore question whether this strategy alone can resolve the crisis. They point to continuing security challenges and argue that military measures must be accompanied by economic development, political dialogue where possible, stronger institutions, and protection of civilian populations. These differing views illustrate that the debate extends far beyond one alleged tunnel. Yet both supporters and critics generally agree on one important point. No country can achieve lasting peace if armed groups continue to access reliable funding, recruitment, and logistical support. Whether those networks are financial, criminal, or operational. Disrupting them remains one of the most critical objectives in any long-term strategy to stabilize the Sahel. The debate surrounding Burkina Faso's security strategy does not end at its borders. It has also become part of a wider international discussion involving governments, analysts, and media organizations across the world. While many Africans see recent policies as an effort to restore sovereignty, several Western governments and international observers have expressed serious concerns about the direction the country has taken. Among the most common criticisms are the prolonged military transition, restrictions placed on certain international media organizations, and concerns regarding human rights during counter-terrorism operations. Some analysts also question whether distancing Burkina Faso from its traditional security partners could create new strategic risks in the future. Supporters of Captain Ibrahim Traore present a different perspective. They argue that Burkina Faso inherited an already severe security crisis and that expecting immediate results ignores the complexity of a conflict that developed over many years. They also maintain that no government can organize fully effective democratic processes while significant parts of its territory remain threatened by armed violence. From their point of view, restoring security is the foundation upon which long-term political stability must eventually be built. This difference in perspective highlights an important reality. The conflict in the Sahel is no longer viewed solely through a military lens. It has become a debate about sovereignty, governance, international partnerships, development, and the right of African nations to determine their own security priorities. For ordinary citizens, separating verified facts from political narratives has become increasingly difficult. Allegations, counter-allegations, official statements, independent investigations, and social media campaigns all compete for public attention. That is precisely why careful analysis remains essential. Every major claim, including reports about hidden logistical networks, should ultimately be assessed according to credible evidence, while recognizing that information itself has become another battlefield in the struggle over the future of the Sahel. Every major conflict leaves behind lessons that extend far beyond the battlefield, whether or not the reported tunnel is ultimately confirmed. The discussion surrounding it highlights challenges that many African nations continue to face. Security today is no longer measured by the strength of an army. It also depends on the ability to protect borders, disrupt illegal financial networks, secure natural resources, and cooperate with neighboring countries against threats that ignore national frontiers. For Burkina Faso, the central question is not simply how to defeat one armed group after another. It is how to prevent new networks from emerging faster than old ones disappear. That objective requires intelligence sharing, stronger institutions, economic opportunities for vulnerable communities, and regional coordination through organizations such as the Alliance of Sahel States. Military operations may weaken armed groups, but lasting stability also depends on cutting off the systems that finance, recruit, and sustain them. Many supporters of Pan-Africanism believe these challenges cannot be solved by any single country acting alone. They argue that cooperation between African nations should extend beyond defense to include border management, economic development, infrastructure, and the protection of strategic resources. In this view, security and sovereignty reinforce one another. A nation that controls its territory, resources, and institutions is better positioned to protect its future. The broader lesson reaches beyond the Sahel. Every African country facing transnational crime, smuggling, or extremist violence confronts similar questions. How can governments strengthen cooperation without sacrificing sovereignty? How can they secure borders while supporting legitimate trade and local communities? How can they ensure that natural wealth benefits their own citizens rather than fueling instability. Whether discussing Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, or other nations across the continent, one principle remains clear. Long-term peace cannot rest solely on military victories. It must also be built through resilient institutions, regional solidarity, and the determination to address the deeper causes that allow insecurity to survive across generations. As our discussion comes to an end, one important question still remains. Was the alleged tunnel truly the missing link behind years of violence, or is it simply one piece of a much larger and far more complex puzzle? At this stage, independent public confirmation has not established the full details of these reports. Nevertheless, the debate itself reminds us that lasting peace depends not only on what happens during military operations, but also on understanding the hidden systems that allow conflicts to continue. Whether supply networks operate through remote border crossings, criminal trafficking routes, illegal financial channels, or other clandestine methods, every nation confronting armed violence must eventually address the same challenge. Eliminating individual fighters may produce temporary victories, but dismantling the structures that sustain conflict offers the possibility of lasting securities. For many supporters of Pan-Africanism, this is also a defining moment for Africa's future. They believe Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are attempting to demonstrate that African nations can strengthen regional cooperation while protecting their own sovereignty. Others remain skeptical and argue that these strategies must ultimately be judged by measurable improvements in security, governance, and the daily lives of ordinary citizens. The coming years will determine which vision proves more sustainable. One fact, however, is difficult to dispute. The future of the Sahel will not be decided by one battle, one speech, or one political leader alone. It will depend on whether governments, on communities, and regional partners can build institutions strong enough to outlast violence and resilient enough to prevent new crises from emerging. As Captain Ibrahim Traore continues to promote a vision centered on Burkina Faso, African Union cooperation, Africa new partnerships, and the ideals of Pan-African solidarity, the wider continent will continue watching closely. Whether viewed through the lens of Pan-Africanism or broader regional security, the choices made today may influence generations to come. If you enjoyed this analysis of Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, and the future of Pan-African cooperation, subscribe to the channel, share this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective is an important part of this conversation. Have you ever wondered why a valley once used by extremist groups is now becoming one of the places they fear the most? Recently, Burkina Faso's BIR-23 launched a decisive operation against a JNIM position in Bangasso, a locality within the Sauru Valley. After several days of surveillance and intelligence gathering, the unit moved into action. When the operation ended, the militant base had been destroyed, and valuable equipment had been seized. At first glance, this may appear to be another successful counter-terrorism mission. However, the events in Bangasso may represent something much larger. They reflect changing military tactics in Burkina Faso, the growing influence of African-led security strategies, and a broader effort by the Alliance of Sahel states to strengthen regional self-reliance. If you are interested in understanding the forces reshaping West Africa today, be sure to follow the channel and stay with us until the end. To understand the importance of this operation, we must first look at the Sauru Valley itself. For years, the region has held strategic value because of its location and its role as a movement corridor for armed groups. Control of this area can influence security across surrounding communities. What makes the Bangasso operation stand out is not only the outcome, but also the preparation behind it. BIR-23 reportedly spent days monitoring the target, gathering information, and studying enemy activity before launching its assault. This detail reveals an important lesson. Modern military success is often built on patience, intelligence, and careful planning. In Bangasso, information became a weapon, and preparation laid the foundation for victory. The destruction of the Bangasso base was more than a tactical success. It represented a direct challenge to JNIM's ability to operate freely inside the Suru Valley. According to reports from the operation, BIR-23 not only eliminated the position, but also recovered weapons, satellite communication equipment, and mobility assets used by the militants. Each of these items plays an important role in sustaining insurgent activity. Weapons provide combat capability. Communication devices allow coordination across remote areas. Vehicles make it possible to move fighters, supplies, and information quickly across difficult terrain. When a group loses these resources, the impact goes far beyond a single battlefield encounter. Replacing trained fighters may be difficult, but rebuilding a disrupted support network can be even harder. Logistics, communications, and mobility are the foundations that allow insurgent organizations to survive over long periods. This is why the Bangasso operation carries strategic significance. The loss of a base means the loss of a safe location for planning, regrouping, and storing resources. It forces militants to spend time and energy rebuilding instead of expanding their activities. The psychological effect is equally important. Areas once viewed as secure can suddenly become vulnerable when intelligence-driven operations begin targeting hidden positions. For JNIM, that creates uncertainty. Fighters can no longer assume that remote locations automatically provide protection. For local communities, the message is very different. Operations like this demonstrate that state security forces are willing and able to pursue threats beyond major towns and into areas that have long experienced instability. The battle in Bangasso was therefore not only about what was destroyed, it was about changing the balance of confidence. JNIM lost a place it depended on, while Burkina Faso gained another example of its growing ability to challenge extremist networks in one of the most contested parts of the country. What makes BIR-23 stand out is not simply its ability to win battles. Many military units can achieve success under favorable conditions. What separates elite formations from ordinary ones is their ability to produce results consistently in difficult environments. The Bangasso operation highlights several characteristics that have helped BIR-23 build a growing reputation across Burkina Faso. First is discipline. Rather than rushing toward a target, the unit appears to prioritize observation, preparation, and timing. This reduces unnecessary risks and increases the chances of success once an operation begins. Second is the emphasis on intelligence. Modern conflicts are often won by those who understand the battlefield better than their opponents. Knowing where a group is located, how it communicates, when it moves, and where it stores equipment can be more valuable than overwhelming firepower. BIR-23 has increasingly demonstrated the importance of information-driven operations. Third is initiative. In many conflicts, security forces spend most of their time reacting to attacks. BIR-23 represents a different approach. Instead of waiting for threats to emerge, it seeks to identify and disrupt them before they can act. This shift from reaction to prevention can significantly change the security environment over time. These qualities have helped transform the unit into more than a military formation. For many citizens, it has become a symbol of determination and national resilience. Each successful mission reinforces the belief that difficult areas can be stabilized and that extremist groups are not invincible. Perhaps the most important lesson is that effective military power is not measured only by weapons or numbers. It is measured by preparation, adaptability, and the ability to make sound decisions under pressure. In that sense, BIR-23 represents a broader transformation taking place within Burkina Faso's security strategy. To understand why operations such as Bangasso continue to attract attention across West Africa, it is important to look beyond the battlefield and examine the broader security philosophy that has emerged under Ibrahim Traore's leadership. One of the most significant shifts has been the move away from a purely defensive posture. For many years, security forces in the region were often forced to respond after attacks had already occurred. Armed groups would strike villages, disrupt transportation routes, or target military positions before disappearing into difficult terrain. This created a cycle in which the initiative frequently remained with the insurgents. The approach increasingly associated with Burkina Faso today seeks to reverse that dynamic. Rather than waiting for threats to appear, security forces aim to identify hostile networks, monitor their movements, and disrupt their operations before attacks can be launched. The Bangasso operation reflects this principle. Days of surveillance were followed by a carefully timed intervention designed to remove a threat before it could strengthen its position. This shift also reflects a broader emphasis on regaining control of territory. Security is not measured only by the absence of attacks. It is also measured by whether citizens can travel safely, cultivate farmland, conduct business, and maintain normal daily life. Every area restored to greater stability represents progress toward that objective. Equally important is the psychological dimension. Successful operations help strengthen public confidence in state institutions. When communities repeatedly witness security forces taking initiative and producing results, trust can begin to replace fear. That confidence becomes an important asset in its own right, because local populations are often essential sources of information and cooperation. For this reason, the significance of Bangasso extends beyond the immediate outcome. The operation serves as an example of how a new security mindset is being translated into action on the ground, combining intelligence, preparation, and persistence in pursuit of longer-term stability. While Ibrahim Traore is often the most visible figure associated with Burkina Faso's security transformation, the developments taking place today extend beyond any single leader. They are increasingly connected to the broader vision emerging within the Alliance of Sahel States, commonly known as AES. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger face many of the same challenges. Armed groups move across borders, exploit remote terrain, and take advantage of gaps in regional coordination. Because these threats do not stop at national boundaries, the response cannot remain limited to individual countries acting alone. This reality has encouraged deeper cooperation among AES members. Intelligence sharing, military coordination, training initiatives, and joint security planning have become important components of the alliance's strategy. The objective is not simply to react to isolated incidents, but to create a more integrated approach to regional security. The Bangasso operation can be viewed through this wider lens. While the action itself occurred within Burkina Faso, its significance reaches beyond a single location. Every successful operation that weakens extremist networks contributes to the overall security environment of neighboring countries as well. For supporters of the AES project, this represents an important shift. Instead of relying primarily on external actors to define security priorities, member states are increasingly seeking to build solutions based on their own assessment of local realities. Whether one fully agrees with every aspect of this approach or not, it reflects a growing determination to develop regional capabilities from within. In that sense, Bangasso is more than a battlefield success. It is another example of how Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are attempting to transform shared security challenges into opportunities for deeper cooperation and greater self-reliance across the Sahel region. As Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger pursue a more independent security strategy, their approach continues to generate debate beyond the region. Some Western governments, analysts, and organizations have expressed concerns about governance, military influence in politics, and the long-term implications of the changes taking place across the Sahel. Critics argue that security operations alone cannot solve every challenge facing the region. They point to issues such as economic development, political reform, and human rights as factors that must also be addressed. These concerns remain part of the broader international discussion surrounding the future of the Sahel. At the same time, many citizens within the region view the situation through a different lens. For communities that have endured years of violence, displacement, and insecurity, the immediate question is often whether daily life is becoming safer. From this perspective, successful operations against armed groups carry significant weight because they directly affect the ability of families to work, travel, and live without fear. The reality is that both security and long-term development matter. Stability creates conditions for progress, while lasting progress helps reinforce stability. The challenge for Burkina Faso and its partners is to strengthen both at the same time. The operation in Bangasso illustrates why this debate continues. Supporters see evidence of growing capability and determination. Critics urge caution and broader reforms. Between these perspectives lies an important truth. Nations are ultimately judged not only by promises or criticism, but by the conditions experienced by their people on the ground. The operation in Bangasso will likely be remembered for more than the destruction of a single militant base. It represents a broader story unfolding across the Sahel, one that combines military adaptation, regional cooperation, and a growing belief in self-reliance. For Burkina Faso, the mission demonstrated the effectiveness of intelligence-driven operations. BIR-23 showed that patience, preparation, and precise execution can produce meaningful results against determined adversaries. The success also reinforced the unit's growing reputation as one of the most capable military formations in the region. At a deeper level, the operation reflected the security philosophy that has become increasingly associated with Ibrahim Traore's leadership. The emphasis on initiative rather than reaction, on reclaiming territory rather than merely defending it, and on strengthening local capabilities rather than relying exclusively on external solutions continues to shape the country's approach. The significance extends beyond Burkina Faso. Through the alliance of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are attempting to create a framework in which neighboring countries cooperate more closely to confront common threats. Whether this model ultimately achieves all of its goals remains to be seen, but its influence on regional discussions is already clear. Perhaps the most important lesson from Bangasso is that lasting change often begins with a series of determined actions. A single operation cannot solve every challenge facing the Sahel, yet each successful step can help create momentum, restore confidence, and open new possibilities for the future. For many supporters of Pan-African ideals, the events in Burkina Faso symbolize something larger than military success. They reflect an Africa new vision of responsibility, capability, and self-determination. Discussions about Pan-Africanism, the African Union, Captain Ibrahim Traore, and Ibrahim Traore himself continue to generate strong opinions, but they also highlight a growing conversation about how African nations can shape their own future. As Burkina Faso moves forward, many across the continent will be watching closely. If you found this analysis valuable, share your thoughts below and subscribe to the channel for more insights into the changing landscape of Africa and the Sahel. Just a few years ago, the idea of Burkina Faso turning one of the most dangerous corners of the Sahel into a fortified stronghold would have sounded impossible. In many parts of the country, armed groups moved freely, entire communities lived under constant fear, and government authorities struggled to reach remote regions. Yet today, a very different story is unfolding in a place called Petegoli. What makes this story remarkable is not simply that Burkina Faso repelled another attack. It is that a coalition of JNIM and Islamic State Sahel elements reportedly launched a counter-offensive aimed at challenging Burkinabe positions, only to be pushed back while leaving behind weapons, communication equipment, drones, supplies, and valuable logistical assets. For many observers, This battle represents far more than a tactical victory. It symbolizes a nation determined to reclaim territory that once seemed lost. At the center of this transformation stands Captain Ibrahim Traore, a leader whose supporters argue has reshaped Burkina Faso's military doctrine and restored confidence in the country's ability to defend itself. But is Petegoli truly evidence that the balance of power in the Sahel is changing? And could this remote frontier become the symbol of a new era for Burkina Faso? Before we begin, if you enjoy in-depth analysis of African security, leadership, and transformation stories, make sure to follow the channel so you never miss our future reports. Petegoli is not a name that appears often in international headlines. It is not a major capital city, nor is it a famous economic center. Yet in the security landscape of the Sahel, this small location carries enormous strategic importance. To understand why the recent events there matter so much, we must first understand where Petegoli sits and why armed groups have fought so hard to control it. Located within Burkina Faso's Soum province, Petegoli lies near one of the most sensitive regions in West Africa. This area forms part of the broader zone connecting Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, a region often described by security analysts as the heart of the Sahel conflict. For years, extremist organizations exploited these vast borderlands because government presence was weak. Populations were scattered, and movement across frontiers was difficult to monitor. In practical terms, controlling a place like Petegoli means controlling access routes. Armed groups can move fighters, transport weapons, gather intelligence, and establish logistical networks through such corridors. That is why organizations like JNIM and Islamic State Sahel have repeatedly sought influence in this region. They understand that territory is more than land. Territory provides mobility, resources, and strategic depth for local communities. However, the consequences have been devastating. Many families have lived under years of uncertainty. Farmers worried about reaching their fields. Traders feared traveling between villages. Entire communities learned to live with the possibility of sudden violence. When Burkina Faso's forces recaptured Petegoli in March 2026, they were not simply reclaiming a point on a map. They were sending a message that state authority could return to places long associated with insecurity. The significance of that operation extends beyond military gains. It represents an attempt to restore confidence among citizens who have spent years wondering whether their government could truly protect them. That is why Petegoli has become far more than a village. It has become a symbol of a larger struggle over the future of Burkina Faso and the wider Sahel. The forces that attacked Petegoli did not choose their target by accident. From their perspective, retaking the area would have carried enormous military and psychological value. A successful operation could have disrupted Burkina Faso's defensive lines, weakened confidence in government forces, and reopened an important corridor for future militant activity across the wider Sahel region. According to reports surrounding the operation, the attackers attempted to challenge the defensive positions established after Burkina Faso regained control of the area. This follows a pattern often seen throughout the Sahel. Armed groups rarely abandon strategically important territory without attempting to test the strength of newly established security positions. Typically, such efforts begin with reconnaissance. Information is gathered through local networks, surveillance activities, and increasingly through commercially available drones. Once weaknesses are identified, sabotage operations may follow. The objective is to create uncertainty, disrupt communications, and expose vulnerabilities before launching a larger assault. What appears to make the Petegoli case different is the response. Instead of allowing the attackers to build momentum, Burkina Faso's forces reportedly reacted quickly and effectively. Elements of the Rapid Intervention Brigade, supported by local defense volunteers, maintained pressure on the attackers and prevented them from achieving their objectives. The aftermath tells an important story. Reports indicate that weapons, ammunition, communication devices, drone equipment, medical supplies, food stocks, and other logistical materials were recovered after the failed assault. Such losses are significant because insurgent groups operating in remote regions depend heavily on mobility and supply networks. Every abandoned radio, every lost drone, and every captured stockpile represents a setback that can affect future operations. More importantly, the failed counteroffensive delivered a symbolic message. For years, armed groups often dictated the pace of conflict across large portions of the Sahel. In Petegoli, however, they encountered a defensive system that was prepared, organized, and determined to hold its ground. That reality may prove more important than the battlefield statistics themselves. To fully appreciate the significance of Petegoli, it is important to remember where Burkina Faso stood only a few years ago. Today, discussions often focus on drones, rapid intervention units, and territorial recovery. But not long ago, the country's security forces faced a completely different reality. Large sections of the nation were under constant pressure from insurgent attacks. Military units frequently struggled with shortages of equipment, transportation, protective gear, and surveillance capabilities. In many remote areas, the state lacked the tools needed to monitor movements across vast stretches of difficult terrain. Armed groups exploited these weaknesses and expanded their influence in regions that should have been under government control. Supporters of Captain Ibrahim Traore often point to this period when discussing the country's transformation. They argue that one of the most important changes was not simply acquiring new military hardware, but changing the mindset of the security establishment. Instead of reacting to attacks after they occurred, the focus shifted toward anticipating threats and maintaining constant awareness of the battlefield. A major part of that transformation involved the expansion of drone capabilities. Modern unmanned aerial systems provided something Burkina Faso had long needed: the ability to observe remote regions, track suspicious movements, and respond more rapidly to emerging threats. Combined with the growth of Rapid Intervention Brigade units, these capabilities helped create a more flexible and mobile security structure. The contrast is striking. A military once associated with limited resources is now increasingly linked with surveillance technology, rapid deployment forces, and coordinated territorial defense. While challenges remain, and security threats have certainly not disappeared, the difference between the Burkina Faso of a few years ago and the Burkina Faso of today is difficult to ignore. For many citizens, the story of Petegoli reflects that larger transformation. It is not simply about military modernization. It is about a nation attempting to prove that it can protect its territory, defend its communities, and shape its own future without depending entirely on others to secure its borders. One of the most interesting aspects of the Petegoli story is that it reflects a broader strategic philosophy associated with Captain Ibrahim Traore. In many conflicts around the world, armies succeed in capturing territory only to lose it again weeks or months later. Temporary victories may generate headlines, but they rarely change the overall security situation. What appears different in Burkina Faso's recent approach is the emphasis on holding ground after it has been recovered. This strategy is built on a simple principle. A territory is not truly liberated if government authority disappears the moment military operations end. Security forces must remain present, supply routes must remain open, local populations must feel protected, administrative structures must eventually return. Without these elements, Insurgent groups can simply wait for an opportunity to come back. Petegoli offers an example of this approach in practice. After the area was brought back under government control, the objective was not merely to celebrate a victory and move elsewhere. Instead, security positions were reinforced, defensive lines were consolidated, and local defense structures worked alongside regular forces to maintain stability. The goal was to transform a vulnerable frontier into a permanent security zone. Supporters of Traore argue that this reflects a deeper understanding of the conflict. They believe the struggle in the Sahel is not only about winning battles, it is about rebuilding state presence in regions where citizens have long felt abandoned. Every secured road, every protected village, and every functioning local administration becomes part of a larger effort to reclaim national territory. For many observers, this is why Petegoli matters. The battle itself may eventually fade from memory, but the strategy behind it could have lasting consequences. If Burkina Faso succeeds in consistently holding and stabilizing areas once dominated by armed groups, the country may gradually reshape the security landscape of the Sahel. In that sense, Petegoli is not simply a military achievement. It is a test of whether a new model of territorial defense can succeed where previous approaches struggled. Why do so many ordinary citizens continue to support Ibrahim Traore, despite the controversy that often surrounds his government? The answer depends largely on where the question is being asked. For many people living far from the conflict zones, debates often focus on politics, elections, and international relations. For families living near the front lines, however, the priorities can be very different. In communities affected by years of violence, security is not an abstract concept. It determines whether farmers can reach their fields, whether merchants can travel safely to markets, and whether children can attend school without fear. When people spend years facing insecurity, they often judge leadership through the lens of daily survival rather than political theory. This helps explain why operations like the defense of Petegoli resonate so strongly with many Burkinabe citizens. They see evidence that the state is attempting to return to areas that once appeared abandoned. They see security forces maintaining a presence where armed groups previously operated with relative freedom, whether one agrees with every policy or not. These visible changes influence public perception. At the same time, Burkina Faso continues to face criticism from Western governments, international organizations, and human rights groups. Critics raise concerns about democratic governance, press freedom, and allegations connected to counterinsurgency operations. These concerns remain part of the broader international debate surrounding the country's direction. Supporters of Traore respond that such discussions cannot be separated from the security realities facing Burkina Faso. They argue that a government confronting an active insurgency must first ensure national survival before it can address every other challenge. In their view, stability creates the foundation upon which political and economic progress can eventually be built. The result is a complex debate with no simple answers. International observers often emphasize democratic standards and institutional concerns. Many local citizens focus on safety, territorial control, and the restoration of normal life. Understanding Burkina Faso today requires recognizing both perspectives, because each reflects a different experience of the same conflict. As the dust settles over Petegoli, one question remains. Are we witnessing a single battlefield success, or the early signs of a deeper transformation taking place across Burkina Faso and the wider Sahel? The failed counteroffensive by JNIM and Islamic State Sahel forces demonstrated that the security environment is changing. A location that once symbolized vulnerability has become a test case for a different approach to territorial defense. The combination of rapid response forces, Stronger battlefield awareness, local support structures, and a determination to hold recovered territory has given Burkina Faso an opportunity to challenge long-standing assumptions about the conflict. Yet the road ahead remains difficult. Armed groups continue to operate across parts of the Sahel, and lasting stability will require more than military victories alone. It will demand development, governance, economic opportunity, and continued trust between citizens and the state. Still, Petegoli carries a message that extends far beyond one village. For many supporters, it represents the belief that Burkina Faso can chart its own course, defend its own territory, and pursue its own vision of sovereignty, whether viewed through the lens of security, leadership, or national pride. The story has become closely linked with Pan-African aspirations and debates about the future of the continent. As Africa enters a new chapter, many eyes will remain fixed on Burkina Faso, the African Union, the ideals of Pan-Africanism, and the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore. Whether history ultimately judges Ibrahim Traore as a transformational figure remains to be seen, but Petegoli has already become part of that story. If you enjoyed this analysis of African new developments and the changing realities of the Sahel, be sure to follow the channel and join us for future discussions. The sound of gunfire once again echoed across Niger's capital before sunrise. Residents living near Diori Hamani International Airport woke up to explosions, sustained gunfire, and the terrifying realization that one of the country's most strategic locations had once again come under attack. For nearly 2 hours, security forces and armed attackers exchanged fire around the airport area, turning what should have been an ordinary morning into another reminder that the struggle for stability in the Sahel is far from over. According to security reports, Nigerian forces quickly responded to the assault and eventually pushed the attackers back before they could penetrate deeper into the airport's defenses. Several militants were reportedly killed, while authorities maintained control of the facility. Yet, for many observers, the most important questions began only after the shooting stopped. Why was the same strategic airport targeted again only months after a major attack earlier this year? How were the attackers able to organize such an operation? And why did reports emerging from the subsequent security sweep suggest that investigators may have uncovered something far more troubling than a simple terrorist assault? As security forces expanded their search operations across Niamey, reports began circulating about arrests, hidden weapons, and possible support networks operating within the city itself. While some claims remain unverified, they have reignited a debate that has been growing across the alliance of Sahel states for months. Was this merely another terrorist attack? Or could it be evidence of a deeper campaign designed to destabilize Niger and its allies from within? In today's analysis, we will examine what happened at Niamey's airport, why this location continues to be a target, and whether recent events may be connected to the warning that Captain Ibrahim Traore once described as a coming black winter. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and join our growing community following Africa's rapidly changing future. Diori Hamani International Airport is not just another airport on the African continent. For Niger, it represents a gateway to the world, a critical transportation hub, and one of the most important strategic assets in the country's security architecture. That reality explains why every attack directed at this location attracts attention far beyond the borders of Niger itself. When reports emerged that armed militants had once again targeted the airport area, many observers immediately remembered the major assault that occurred only a few months earlier. At that time, attackers managed to strike facilities connected to both civilian and military operations. The incident exposed vulnerabilities that authorities believed had already been addressed through stronger surveillance systems, expanded security perimeters, and increased military deployments around the capital. This raises an important question. If security measures were strengthened after the previous attack, why would militants return to the exact same location? One explanation is that the airport's symbolic value may be just as important as its military value. An attack against a remote outpost might go unnoticed by much of the world. An attack near the main airport of a national capital immediately generates headlines, creates uncertainty among citizens, and attracts international attention. In modern conflicts, perception can sometimes be as powerful as physical damage. The airport also occupies a special place within the broader security framework of the Alliance of Sahel states, as Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso continue expanding cooperation against armed groups. Strategic facilities such as Traore Hamani become symbols of the alliance's ability to maintain order and defend national sovereignty. For that reason, the recent assault may have carried a message beyond the immediate objective of causing casualties or disruption. It may have been intended to challenge public confidence and demonstrate that even heavily protected locations remain vulnerable. Whether successful or not, the repeated targeting of the same strategic facility suggests that the struggle unfolding across the Sahel is increasingly focused on symbols of state authority and regional cooperation rather than isolated military positions alone. As the gunfire faded and security forces secured the airport perimeter, attention quickly shifted toward what investigators might uncover during the operations that followed. In many security crises, the attack itself is only the beginning of the story. What authorities discover afterward often reveals whether the incident was an isolated act or part of a much larger network. Following the assault in Niamey, security personnel reportedly expanded search and intelligence operations across multiple areas of the capital. Reports emerged that several suspects had been detained for questioning, while security patrols intensified around strategic locations. These developments immediately fueled speculation about how the attackers were able to prepare and execute such an operation so close to one of the country's most protected facilities. Particularly controversial were reports circulating through various media and social networks claiming that investigators had discovered weapons caches and arrested individuals suspected of providing logistical support. Among the most widely discussed allegations were claims involving a French citizen and the discovery of military equipment hidden within an urban residence. At the time of this analysis, many of these claims remain disputed or unverified, making caution essential when evaluating them. However, even without confirming every allegation, the broader concern remains highly relevant. Modern insurgent operations rarely depend solely on the individuals who carry out an attack. Successful assaults often require transportation, communications, safe houses, financial assistance, intelligence gathering, IP, and local support networks. These structures are typically far less visible than armed fighters themselves. This is why many citizens across Niger are asking a different question today. The concern is no longer limited to who pulled the trigger near the airport. Instead, attention is increasingly focused on whether hidden support systems may exist within urban areas, allowing violent groups to operate closer to major population centers. If such networks are present, the challenge facing Niger extends beyond military operations. It becomes a question of intelligence, community vigilance, and the ability of state institutions to identify threats before they reach strategic targets. For many observers, that possibility is far more alarming than the attack itself. Long before the latest attack in Niamey, Captain Ibrahim Traore repeatedly warned that the struggle facing the countries of the Sahel was evolving. According to his view, the conflict was never simply about armed men moving through remote deserts or attacking isolated military positions. He argued that as governments became more effective in confronting insurgent groups on the battlefield, Those groups and their supporters would adapt by seeking new methods of pressure. This idea is often associated with what supporters describe as a coming Black Winter. Rather than referring to a single military campaign, the concept suggests a period of intensified instability characterized by sabotage, psychological pressure, economic disruption, and attempts to weaken public confidence in national institutions. From this perspective, attacks on strategic infrastructure carry a significance far beyond their immediate tactical impact. A strike against an airport, a military base, or a government facility can create fear among citizens, generate international headlines, and raise doubts about whether authorities truly control the situation. The objective may be less about occupying territory and more about shaping perceptions. Events in Niger have therefore attracted attention across the alliance of Sahel states. Supporters of Traore's analysis point out that the recent attack occurred not in a distant border region, but near the heart of the capital itself. They argue that this reflects a broader shift from conventional insurgent tactics toward operations designed to create insecurity within major urban centers. Similar concerns have been expressed in Mali and Burkina Faso, where authorities frequently emphasize the importance of intelligence gathering, community vigilance, and the identification of support networks that may operate behind the scenes, whether one agrees entirely with the Black Winter interpretation or not. The underlying warning remains relevant. The greatest threat may not always come from visible fighters on the battlefield. It may emerge through hidden structures that finance, organize, support, and enable acts of violence from within society itself. That possibility helps explain why the events in Niamey are being discussed not merely as a security incident, but as part of a much larger regional struggle. The response of the Alliance of Sahel States to recent security threats reveals how dramatically the region's strategy has evolved over the past several years. Rather than viewing attacks as isolated incidents affecting individual countries, the leaders of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso increasingly present them as shared challenges requiring coordinated solutions. For Niger's leader, General Abdurrahmani Tiani, the attack near Niamey's airport represents more than a local security breach. It is a direct challenge to national stability and public confidence. Maintaining control over strategic infrastructure has become essential, not only for security purposes, but also for demonstrating that the state remains capable of protecting its citizens and institutions. In Mali, General Assimi Goïta has consistently emphasized the importance of African-led security solutions. His government has repeatedly argued that long-term stability cannot depend entirely on external assistance. Instead, regional states must strengthen their own military capabilities, intelligence systems, and operational coordination. Captain Ibrahim Traore has advanced a similar message in Burkina Faso. He frequently argues that sovereignty means more than political independence. In his view, true sovereignty includes the ability to defend borders, secure strategic assets, and prevent foreign or domestic actors from undermining national stability. These shared perspectives have contributed to the growing cooperation within the Alliance of Sahel States. Intelligence sharing has become increasingly important as authorities seek to identify recruitment networks, financial channels, and logistical structures that may support violent groups across national borders. Military cooperation has also expanded, reflecting a recognition that many security threats move freely throughout the wider Sahel region. The attack in Niamey may therefore strengthen existing efforts rather than weaken them. Instead of encouraging division, such incidents can reinforce the belief among AES leaders that closer coordination is necessary. Whether these policies ultimately succeed remains to be seen. But one message appears clear. The governments of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso increasingly view security as a collective responsibility, and they appear determined to confront emerging threats through deeper regional cooperation rather than isolated national responses. The events in Niamey have also reignited a broader debate about the future direction of the Sahel and the role of external powers in the region. For years, governments in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso maintained close security partnerships with Western nations. Yet despite extensive military cooperation, large areas of the region continued to experience persistent instability and violence. Critics in Western countries often express concern about the political trajectory of the alliance of Sahel states. They question the long-term sustainability of military-led governments and argue that democratic institutions remain essential for lasting stability. Others worry that changing security partnerships could create new uncertainties in an already fragile region. These concerns deserve consideration. However, supporters of the AES approach offer a different perspective. They argue that the primary responsibility of any government is to provide security for its population. From their viewpoint, years of international assistance failed to eliminate the threats facing the region, forcing Sahelian states to reconsider existing strategies and seek alternative partnerships. This disagreement reflects a larger debate about sovereignty. Should African countries be free to choose their own security partners and development paths? Even when those choices differ from Western preferences, many leaders within AES answer that question with a clear yes. At the same time, the situation should not be reduced to a simple struggle between Africa and the West. The real challenge remains the protection of citizens, the defeat of violent groups, and the creation of conditions that allow economic growth and political stability to flourish. The attack in Niamey, therefore, highlights more than a security crisis. It exposes competing visions for the future of the Sahel. One side emphasizes continuity with established international partnerships. The other argues for a new approach centered on greater self-reliance, regional cooperation, and stronger national control over security affairs. The outcome of that debate may influence the region for many years to come. The attack near Niamey's airport may eventually be remembered for more than the gunfire, the casualties, or the arrests that followed. It may become a symbol of a larger struggle unfolding across the Sahel, a struggle that touches sovereignty, security, national identity, and the future direction of an entire region. What happened in Niger demonstrates that modern conflicts are no longer fought only on distant battlefields. They are increasingly fought through information networks, hidden support structures, economic pressure, and attempts to influence public confidence. A nation can secure its borders and still face threats that emerge from within its own cities. That reality explains why leaders across the Sahel continue emphasizing vigilance, intelligence, and national unity as essential components of security. For the countries of the Alliance of Sahel States, the challenge extends beyond defeating armed groups. The broader objective is to build institutions capable of protecting infrastructure, defending sovereignty, and maintaining public trust during uncertainty. The debate surrounding the recent events in Niamey will continue. Some observers will focus on terrorism. Others will focus on geopolitics. Still others will examine governance and regional cooperation. Yet all these discussions point toward the same issue. Stability cannot exist without security, and security cannot endure without public support. As Africa enters a new chapter, many citizens are asking what sovereignty should look like. The ideas of Pan-African cooperation, Pan-Africanism, and stronger regional partnerships continue shaping that conversation. From Burkina Faso to Niger and Mali, leaders such as Captain Ibrahim Traore have become central figures in debates about the future of the continent, whether through the African Union, regional alliances, or what many describe as an Africa New Vision, the search for stability remains a defining challenge. If you found value in this analysis, share your thoughts below and subscribe to the channel. The arrival of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Ghana has triggered a wave of questions across West Africa. Officially, Washington says the mission is straightforward. A team of FBI instructors has traveled to Ghana to help local law enforcement strengthen its ability to combat terrorism, organized crime, and transnational criminal networks. The training program is scheduled to last only 10 days. On the surface, it appears to be another example of international security cooperation. Yet many observers believe the timing is too significant to ignore. Why is this happening now? At a moment when the Alliance of Sahel States, known as AES, is gaining momentum. Why is an intelligence-focused program being launched in a country that sits directly south of Burkina Faso, one of the most influential members of the new alliance? And why does the training focus heavily on intelligence gathering, threat identification, and undercover operations rather than traditional policing methods? These questions have fueled intense debate throughout the region. Some see the FBI's presence as a legitimate effort to help Ghana address growing security threats. Others wonder whether a larger geopolitical game is unfolding behind closed doors. Before drawing conclusions, it is important to begin with the facts. According to official statements, the FBI training program involves officers from Ghana's Criminal Investigation Department and Police Intelligence Directorate. The curriculum includes intelligence collection, analysis of criminal networks, undercover investigations, proactive threat detection, and counterterrorism techniques. These are highly specialized areas that focus on identifying threats before they become visible. This detail matters because the program is not centered on routine policing. It is centered on information. In today's world, information is often the most valuable strategic asset. Whoever gathers it first gains an advantage. That reality is one reason why the FBI's arrival has attracted so much attention far beyond the borders of Ghana. Ghana occupies a unique position on the map of West Africa. To many outsiders, it is often viewed as one of the region's most stable democracies, a country known for peaceful elections, economic resilience, and growing international partnerships. However, when security analysts examine Ghana's location more closely, they see something else entirely. They see a strategic gateway positioned directly beneath one of the most important geopolitical regions in Africa today. To the north lies Burkina Faso, a founding member of the Alliance of Sahel States. Beyond Burkina Faso are Mali and Niger, the other two pillars of the AES alliance. Together, these countries have become the center of a major shift in African politics and security. Their governments have pursued policies aimed at reducing foreign influence, strengthening military sovereignty, and building regional cooperation independent of traditional Western structures. This geographic reality makes Ghana far more significant than many people realize. Any organization seeking to monitor security developments in the Sahel naturally pays close attention to countries along its southern edge. Ghana provides access to transportation routes, commercial networks, communication channels, and regional intelligence flows that connect coastal West Africa to the interior Sahel region. From a purely strategic perspective, Ghana is positioned at a crossroads. Information moving between coastal states and the Sahel often passes through the same economic and security corridors. This is one reason why international powers have consistently invested in partnerships with Ghana over the years. For supporters of the FBI training program, Ghana's location explains exactly why enhanced security cooperation is necessary. If instability from the Sahel spreads southward, Ghana could become one of the first countries affected. For critics, however, the same geography raises different questions. if Ghana sits at the crossroads of regional information networks? Could intelligence cooperation also provide valuable insight into the activities of neighboring AES countries? No public evidence currently supports such a claim. Yet, geography alone explains why many observers across Africa immediately connected the FBI's arrival not only to Ghana's security challenges, but also to the broader transformation taking place throughout the Sahel region. To understand why the FBI's arrival in Ghana has sparked such intense discussion, it is necessary to look beyond Ghana itself and examine the extraordinary rise of the alliance of Sahel states. Only a few years ago, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were often portrayed as fragile nations struggling with insecurity, political instability, and economic challenges. Today, they are attempting something entirely different. Through the creation of AES, these three countries are building a new regional framework based on military cooperation, intelligence sharing, and greater political independence. At the center of this transformation stands Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso. Although still one of the youngest heads of state in the world, Traore has become a powerful symbol for millions of Africans. His speeches consistently focus on sovereignty, self-reliance, and the belief that African nations must control their own destiny. Supporters view him as a leader willing to challenge long-standing systems that many believe have failed to deliver security and prosperity. Traore is not acting alone. In Mali, Assimi Goïta has pursued similar goals, emphasizing military reform and national control over security decisions. In Niger, Abdourahmane Chiani has aligned his government with the broader AES vision. Together, these leaders are attempting to create an alternative model for regional cooperation. One of the most significant developments has been the creation of a joint AES military force. The alliance has also expanded cooperation in intelligence sharing, border security, and strategic planning. These efforts are designed to reduce dependence on external security structures and strengthen coordination among member states. For many young Africans, this movement represents more than politics. It represents a new vision of African self-determination. This growing influence helps explain why international observers closely follow developments within AES. As the alliance becomes more organized and more confident, its decisions increasingly affect the balance of power across West Africa. Against this backdrop, any new security initiative near AES borders naturally attracts heightened attention and speculation. The skepticism surrounding the FBI's presence in Ghana did not emerge in a vacuum. It is rooted in decades of experience, historical memory, and unresolved questions about previous security initiatives across the Sahel region. For more than 20 years, Western governments have invested heavily in counterterrorism programs throughout West Africa. Military partnerships, intelligence sharing agreements, training missions, and regional security initiatives have all been introduced with the stated goal of containing extremist violence and improving stability. Programs associated with international counterterrorism efforts expanded across countries such as Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Large amounts of funding were allocated, military advisors were deployed, intelligence cooperation increased. Yet despite these efforts, violence continued to spread throughout significant portions of the Sahel. For many Africans, this creates an uncomfortable question. If decades of international security involvement were successful, why did insecurity continue to grow in so many areas? Supporters of Western engagement argue that the threat environment became more complex and that without international assistance, the situation might have been even worse. Critics, however, point to the continued expansion of armed groups as evidence that existing approaches failed to solve the root causes of instability. These differing interpretations help explain why reactions to the FBI training mission have been so emotional. Among many citizens, the issue is not simply whether the FBI can provide useful training. The deeper concern involves sovereignty. Who controls information, who sets security priorities, and who ultimately benefits from intelligence collected within African countries. For supporters of AES and the broader Pan-African movement, these questions are especially important. They believe that Africa's future security should increasingly be managed by Africans themselves. Whether one agrees with that position or not, it reflects a growing sentiment across parts of the continent. As a result, even a relatively small training program can become a symbol of a much larger debate about independence, partnership, and the future direction of African security policy. At this point, it is important to introduce a different perspective. While many observers question the timing of the FBI's arrival in Ghana, others argue that the situation may be far less mysterious than it appears. The first point they raise is simple. Ghana faces genuine security challenges. Although the country has remained more stable than many of its neighbors, officials have repeatedly warned that violence from the Sahel could spread southward. Armed groups operating in border regions have demonstrated an ability to move across vast territories, creating concerns throughout West Africa. From this perspective, strengthening intelligence capabilities is not unusual. Modern security threats are increasingly difficult to detect through traditional policing alone. Criminal organizations, extremist networks, cybercrime groups, and trafficking operations often operate across multiple countries. Intelligence-led policing has become a common tool used by governments around the world to identify threats before they materialize. Supporters of the FBI partnership also emphasize an important fact. There is currently no public evidence showing that the training program is designed to monitor Ibrahim Traore, AES leadership, or the internal affairs of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Much of the speculation surrounding these issues is based on timing, geography, and political context rather than verified information. This distinction matters. Responsible analysis requires separating documented facts from assumptions. The confirmed facts are that FBI personnel are training Ghanaian officers and that the curriculum focuses on intelligence and counterterrorism. Beyond that, many of the more dramatic claims remain unproven. At the same time, skepticism should not automatically be dismissed. History has taught many Africans to ask difficult questions whenever foreign security interests become involved in regional affairs. The challenge is finding a balance between healthy scrutiny and unsupported conclusions. That balance is essential for understanding what may truly be unfolding across West Africa today. Beyond the debate surrounding Ghana and the FBI lies a much larger story. West Africa is becoming one of the most important geopolitical arenas of the 21st century. What makes this competition different is that it is no longer fought primarily through conventional military deployments. Today, influence is exercised through intelligence networks, economic partnerships, infrastructure investments, information campaigns, security agreements, and access to strategic resources. The United States remains a major player in the region through security cooperation and diplomatic engagement. China continues expanding its economic footprint through infrastructure projects, trade, and development financing. Russia has increased its presence through security partnerships and military cooperation. Meanwhile, regional organizations and African governments are pursuing their own interests in an increasingly complex environment. At the center of this shifting landscape stands the Alliance of Sahel States. The emergence of AES has introduced a new variable into the regional equation. Rather than aligning completely with traditional power structures, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are attempting to chart an independent path. Whether that effort succeeds or fails will have consequences far beyond their borders. This is why seemingly isolated events attract so much attention. A training mission in Ghana is no longer viewed only as a training mission. It is interpreted through the lens of a broader struggle over influence, sovereignty, and the future direction of West Africa. Some observers believe Ghana is simply strengthening its security capabilities. Others believe the country may become an increasingly important frontline state in a growing competition for information and strategic influence. Whatever the truth may be, one fact is becoming difficult to ignore. The future of West Africa is being shaped not only by events on the battlefield, but also by decisions made in intelligence centers, government offices, and diplomatic negotiations. The contest for influence has already begun, and every major actor appears determined to secure a place in the region's future. The arrival of the FBI in Ghana may have started as a security story, but it has evolved into a much larger discussion about sovereignty, influence, and the future of West Africa. Several facts are clear. FBI personnel are currently training Ghanaian officers in intelligence gathering, threat identification, undercover operations, and counter-terrorism methods. Ghana's government presents this partnership as an effort to strengthen national security and prepare for emerging threats. At the same time, no public evidence has been presented showing that the mission is intended to monitor the alliance of Sahel states or target its leaders. Yet questions remain. Those questions exist because Ghana occupies a strategic position near Burkina Faso. They exist because AES is becoming an increasingly influential force in regional politics. They also exist because many Africans remember previous foreign security initiatives that produced results far below expectations. The deeper lesson extends beyond one training program. African nations must continuously balance international cooperation with the protection of national interests. Partnerships can provide expertise, technology, and resources. However, long-term stability depends on building strong local institutions, capable security systems, and independent decision-making. The experiences of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have sparked an important continental conversation. Citizens across Africa are increasingly asking how their countries can strengthen sovereignty while remaining engaged with the world. That discussion sits at the heart of modern Pan-African thought. As the African Union and regional leaders shape the future, figures such as Captain Ibrahim Traore continue to influence debates about self-reliance, development, and Pan-Africanism. Whether admired or criticized, Ibrahim Traore and the changes taking place in Burkina Faso have become part of the broader Africa New narrative emerging across the continent. The story is still unfolding. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe to the channel and continue following our coverage of AES, Burkina Faso, and the future of Africa. What happens when fighter jets are striking targets across Gao, Kidal, Kayes, and Buguni, while, at the very same moment, a national leader chooses to travel through one of the most dangerous roads in the Sahel? That question is now being asked across West Africa after images emerged of Captain Ibrahim Traore traveling alongside troops on the Dédougou-Solenzo route, an area that has faced years of security threats, roadside explosives, and terrorist activity. At the same time, the Malian armed forces have intensified military operations across several strategic regions. Reports from the battlefield indicate precision strikes against militant positions, logistics hubs, weapon storage sites, and networks believed to support terrorist activities, from Gao in the east to Kidal in the north, from Kayes in the west to Buguni in the south. Mali appears determined to increase pressure on armed groups operating across the country. But this story is bigger than military operations alone. It is about leadership under pressure. It is about the changing security landscape of the Sahel. And it is about a growing message coming from the countries of the Alliance of Sahel States that they intend to confront security threats on their own terms. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss important developments shaping the future of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and the wider Sahel region. The first thing that stands out is the scale of Mali's recent operations. Instead of focusing on a single area, military pressure has reportedly been applied across multiple regions simultaneously. In Gao, security forces targeted locations believed to be linked to armed networks. In Kidal, continued surveillance and strike operations aimed to limit the movement of hostile elements. In Kayes, military attention focused on locations suspected of supporting retreat and resupply activities. Meanwhile, in Buguni, security forces disrupted an alleged attempt to place explosive devices along an important transportation corridor. Taken together, these operations reveal something important. Mali is no longer presenting these actions as isolated responses to attacks. The pattern suggests a broader strategy aimed at weakening the infrastructure that allows armed groups to operate, move, communicate, and sustain themselves across vast areas of territory. To understand why Mali has concentrated military pressure on Gao, Kidal, Kayes, and Buguni, it is necessary to look beyond the headlines and examine the strategic value of these locations. Gao has long been one of the most important cities in northern Mali. Positioned along major transportation routes, it serves as a gateway connecting different parts of the country. Control of Gao influences the movement of people, supplies, and security forces. For armed groups, access to areas around Gao can provide opportunities to move resources and maintain operational flexibility. For the state, maintaining control of Gao is essential for preserving national cohesion and projecting authority into remote regions. Kidal carries a different but equally significant importance. For years, the region has been associated with insurgent activity, armed movements, and difficult terrain that complicates security operations. Because of its location and history, Kidal has often been viewed as a symbolic and strategic center in the struggle for stability in northern Mali. Any effort to limit militant freedom of movement in this region carries both military and political significance. Further west lies Kayes, a region frequently described as an economic lifeline. Important commercial routes pass through the area, linking Mali with neighboring countries and international markets. Disruptions in Kayes can affect transportation, trade, fuel supplies, and economic activity far beyond the region itself. This makes security in Kayes a national concern rather than a purely local issue. In the south, Buguni occupies a key position along transportation corridors that support both civilian and military movement. Protecting these routes is critical because armed groups often target roads and infrastructure to create fear, slow economic activity, and undermine confidence in government authority. Viewed together, these four locations form a network of strategic points. By focusing attention on them simultaneously, Mali appears to be targeting not just individual threats, but the geographic foundations that allow long-term insurgent activity to survive. Modern counter-terrorism campaigns are often described in terms of battles, airstrikes, and territorial gains, yet military planners understand a different reality. The true strength of an armed group is rarely measured only by the number of fighters it possesses. It is measured by its ability to sustain operations over time. This is why logistics and financing have become some of the most important battlegrounds in the Sahel. A militant organization can recruit fighters, but without fuel, transportation, communications equipment, weapons, safe houses, and reliable supply routes, its ability to conduct large-scale operations gradually weakens. Every movement across a vast region such as the Sahel requires resources. Every attack requires planning, transportation, intelligence, and supplies. For this reason, recent military actions in Mali appear designed to target more than individual combatants. The focus increasingly includes the systems that allow those combatants to survive and operate. Storage facilities, transportation networks, supply routes, and sources of funding have become critical targets. Military analysts often compare insurgent logistics to the bloodstream of a living organism. As long as resources continue to flow, the organization can adapt and recover from losses. However, when those flows are disrupted, operational effectiveness begins to decline. Fighters may struggle to move between regions. Communication becomes more difficult. Recruitment efforts slow down. Local influence weakens. This strategy is particularly relevant in the Sahel, where distance plays a major role in military operations. Armed groups frequently rely on mobility and dispersed networks rather than large conventional bases. Limiting their freedom of movement can therefore create significant pressure, even without major ground battles. From this perspective, the operations taking place across Mali represent more than a series of tactical victories. They reflect an effort to challenge the foundations that sustain long-term insurgent activity. The objective is not only to win individual engagements, but also to reduce the ability of hostile networks to regenerate, reorganize, and project influence across the regions. While military operations often dominate headlines, the image that captured attention across the Sahel was not a fighter jet, a drone, or a battlefield report. It was the sight of Captain Ibrahim Traore traveling alongside soldiers on the Dédougou-Solenzo route. For many observers, this was far more than a routine visit. The road itself carries significant symbolic weight. For years, areas surrounding this corridor have faced security threats, including armed attacks and roadside explosive devices. Traveling through such an environment is not simply a matter of protocol. It sends a message that leadership is willing to be physically present in regions where security challenges remain real. This is one reason the event resonated so strongly among supporters across Burkina Faso and neighboring countries. In times of conflict, symbolism matters. Soldiers on the front line often measure leadership not only by speeches, but also by visible actions. A leader who appears in difficult environments can strengthen morale and reinforce the belief that sacrifices made by security forces are recognized at the highest levels. The significance of the visit becomes even greater when viewed alongside the military operations taking place in Mali. As pressure increased on armed groups across Gao, Kidal, Kayes, and Bougouni, Traore's presence on a forward route created the impression of a broader regional determination to confront insecurity. Supporters interpreted the journey as evidence of shared risk. They saw a leader willing to stand closer to the realities faced by ordinary soldiers rather than remaining distant from events on the ground. At the same time, the visit carried a message for local communities living in conflict-affected areas. Beyond military objectives, stability ultimately depends on public confidence. When residents witness state institutions maintaining a presence in challenging regions, it can help reinforce the perception that those areas have not been abandoned. For this reason, the journey to Solenzo became more than a security visit. It evolved into a symbol of resilience, responsibility, and the determination to maintain a visible commitment to the struggle for stability across the Sahel. To fully understand the significance of Ibrahim Traore's appearance on the front line, it is important to view it within the broader context of the Alliance of Sahel States, commonly known as AES. The alliance brings together Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, three countries facing similar security challenges and determined to strengthen regional cooperation. While each nation has its own priorities and internal dynamics, they share a common objective: improving security and reducing the influence of armed groups operating across borders. Over the past several years, leaders within the alliance have increasingly emphasized the importance of self-reliance. The argument is straightforward. Lasting security cannot depend entirely on outside actors. National institutions, local armed forces, and regional partnerships must play a leading role in protecting territory and populations. This philosophy is closely associated with Ibrahim Traore's public message. Throughout his leadership, he has frequently stressed themes such as sovereignty, responsibility, resilience, and national ownership of security challenges. His supporters view these ideas as a call for African countries to develop their own solutions to African problems. When Mali launches operations against militant networks, and Traore simultaneously appears among soldiers on a forward route, many observers see more than a coincidence. They see two expressions of the same strategic vision. One represents military action, the other represents political and symbolic leadership. For supporters of AES, the message is clear. Security is not only about weapons and operations, it is also about confidence, unity, and the belief that governments are willing to stand with the people they serve. At the same time, this vision carries significant responsibilities. Greater self-reliance also means greater accountability for results. Citizens ultimately judge leadership not by speeches or symbols alone, but by improvements in safety, stability, economic opportunity, and daily life. That is why the story unfolding across the Sahel is about more than military campaigns. It is about whether a new model of regional cooperation can translate determination and ambition into lasting security for future generations. The growing influence of the Alliance of Sahel states has not gone unnoticed outside the region. As Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger pursue a more independent security strategy, reactions from Western governments, policy institutions, and international observers have become increasingly mixed. Critics often point to concerns surrounding democratic governance, political transitions, freedom of expression, and human rights. Some argue that military-led governments should prioritize a rapid return to civilian rule. Others question whether concentrating power within security-focused administrations can deliver long-term political stability. These concerns continue to shape much of the international debate surrounding the leadership of Ibrahim Traore and the broader direction of AES. However, there is another side to the discussion that cannot be ignored. Many citizens across the Sahel judge policies not only by political theory, but by practical outcomes. For communities that have lived through years of insecurity, displacement, attacks on villages, and disruption of economic life, security often becomes the most immediate concern. In these areas, people frequently ask a simple question: which approach provides greater protection for ordinary families? This explains why support for leaders such as Ibrahim Traore remains strong among many segments of the population. Supporters argue that previous security frameworks, despite receiving substantial international backing, struggled to prevent the expansion of armed groups across large portions of the region. As a result, many citizens became receptive to alternative approaches centered on national sovereignty and regional self-reliance. The reality is likely more complex than either side admits. Effective security requires strong institutions, accountability, economic development, and public trust. Military success alone cannot solve every challenge. At the same time, political reforms become difficult to sustain when communities remain under constant threat. Ultimately, the true measure of success will not be determined by international headlines or political narratives. It will be determined by whether citizens experience safer communities, stronger economies, functioning public services, and greater confidence in the future. That is the standard by which every strategy, whether supported by Western partners or promoted by AES, will eventually be judged. As military operations continue across Gao, Kidal, Kayes, and Buguni, one question remains at the center of the conversation. What will ultimately determine victory in the Sahel? The answer extends far beyond the battlefield. Recent operations suggest that Mali is attempting to place sustained pressure on the networks that support armed groups. At the same time, the image of Captain Ibrahim Traore, traveling alongside soldiers, has reinforced a message that leadership, sacrifice, and national determination remain central themes in the region's struggle for stability. Yet, history teaches an important lesson. Military gains must be followed by consolidation. Roads must remain open. Communities must feel protected. Businesses must recover. Schools must function. Families must believe that peace is becoming more than a temporary pause between conflicts. This is where the future of the Sahel will be decided. For many supporters, Captain Ibrahim Traore has become a symbol of a broader Pan-African vision. His message resonates with those who believe that Burkina Faso and its neighbors should take greater responsibility for their own security and development. Whether one agrees with every aspect of that vision or not, its influence across the region is undeniable. As the alliance of Sahel states continues to evolve, discussions surrounding Pan-Africanism, sovereignty, security, and regional cooperation will remain at the center of Africa-New conversations. The role of Captain Ibrahim Traore, the future of Ibrahim Traore's leadership, the relationship with the African Union, and the aspirations of a new generation will continue to shape the debate. The struggle continues, but so does the hope for a safer and more stable future. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for more in-depth coverage of Burkina Faso, Mali, and the changing future of the Sahel. The explosions did not shock the Sahel. What shocked the region was how fast everything happened. Within hours of coordinated attacks in northern Mali, warplanes linked to the alliance of Sahel states moved into action. Targets were identified. Airspace was coordinated. Intelligence was shared. And for the first time, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger responded not like three separate governments, but like one military structure operating across borders. That is the real story. For years, the Sahel was known for fragmented responses, delayed operations, and international missions that often struggled to react quickly enough to fast-moving insurgent groups. Armed factions learned how to exploit borders, bureaucracy, and hesitation. They survived by moving faster than governments could coordinate. But now something appears to be changing. The Alliance of Sahel States, also known as AES, is beginning to act with a level of coordination that many observers did not expect to see this quickly. And whether people support or oppose these governments, one fact is becoming difficult to ignore. The military landscape of the Sahel may be entering an entirely new phase. This is no longer only about isolated counter-terrorism operations. It is about the possible birth of a regional military system built and controlled inside Africa itself. And that possibility is making many actors nervous. Because if AES can sustain this level of coordination, the balance of security power in West Africa could slowly begin to shift away from older international models and toward a new regional structure driven directly by Sahel states themselves. For the first time in many years, some Africans are asking a different question, not whether outside powers will stabilize the Sahel, but whether the Sahel is preparing to stabilize itself. If you follow Africa's changing future, subscribe, because what is happening now may reshape the continent for decades. At the beginning, Many observers viewed the alliance of Sahel states as mostly political. A declaration, a message of resistance, a symbolic partnership between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, after growing tensions with ECOWAS, France, and several Western security structures. But recent events suggest that AES is becoming something very different. What the region is now witnessing is not simply diplomatic coordination. It is the early formation of a functioning military framework capable of acting across borders with shared objectives and synchronized timing. That distinction matters enormously. For decades, security operations in the Sahel were usually handled country by country. Even when neighboring states faced the same insurgent threats, military responses often remained fragmented. Intelligence moved slowly. Operations required separate approvals. Coordination was limited. Armed groups learned how to exploit those gaps. AES appears to be trying to eliminate them. The recent air operations demonstrated several things at once. Intelligence was shared quickly. Airspace coordination was possible between multiple governments. Decisions were made rapidly, and military pressure was applied almost simultaneously. That is no longer symbolic cooperation. That is operational coordination. And once a regional alliance reaches that stage, the strategic environment begins to change. Because enemies are no longer calculating the response of a single nation. They are calculating the possible response of an entire regional bloc acting together. That creates a very different kind of pressure. For armed groups operating across the Sahel, borders once created breathing room. Fighters could relocate. Networks could reorganize. Delays between governments created time. But if AES continues functioning this way, those gaps may begin to shrink. And that may be the most important military development the Sahel has seen in years. The most dangerous advantage in modern conflict is not always firepower. Sometimes it is speed. And that may be exactly what the alliance of Sahel states is trying to build. The recent military response inside Mali was not remarkable only because airstrikes happened. Airstrikes happen in many conflicts around the world. What made this situation different was the timeline. Operations reportedly began within hours after coordinated attacks in the north. That level of reaction does not happen through improvisation. It suggests that communication systems were already active. Intelligence channels were already functioning. Military leadership already understood who would respond, how they would respond, and how quickly decisions could be approved. That changes everything. For years, one of the biggest weaknesses in Sahel security operations was delay. Information often moved through multiple bureaucratic layers before action was taken. By the time responses were organized, armed groups had already relocated or disappeared into border regions. AES appears to be attempting a completely different model. Instead of waiting for slow international coordination, decisions are being pushed closer to the battlefield itself. And in asymmetric warfare, that can become a massive strategic advantage. Because insurgent groups survive through mobility, they rely on time. Time to escape, time to reorganize, time to exploit confusion between neighboring states. But when three governments coordinate rapidly, those windows begin to close. This is why the speed of the response matters more than the number of aircraft involved. It signals the existence of a structure capable of immediate action. And for many Africans watching the Sahel, this feels historically important. For the first time in a long time, regional security decisions appear to be happening inside the region itself, shaped by governments facing the threat directly, instead of distant international systems operating far from the battlefield. The growing coordination inside the alliance of Sahel states is not only changing military calculations, it is also creating anxiety among armed groups, regional rivals, and even some international powers watching the region closely. Because the real fear is not one successful operation. The real fear is what happens if this becomes normal. For years, many insurgent groups survived by exploiting geography. Borders across the Sahel were often difficult to control. Fighters could move between remote regions, reorganize networks, and avoid concentrated military pressure by crossing from one national territory into another. That environment created flexibility. But a coordinated AES changes that equation. If Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger begin operating as a synchronized security space, movement becomes more dangerous for armed factions. Pressure can emerge from multiple directions at the same time. Escape routes become less predictable. Delays become shorter. And uncertainty begins to grow for groups that once relied on fragmented government responses. That is why reactions from Tuareg separatist groups were immediate and highly focused on the involvement of Burkina Faso and Niger because their participation changes the battlefield itself. But concern is not limited to insurgent groups alone. International observers are also paying close attention because AES represents something larger than counterterrorism operations. It represents the possibility of a regional military structure developing outside many traditional Western-led security frameworks. And that possibility carries geopolitical consequences. If AES succeeds in sustaining rapid coordination, some countries may begin asking difficult questions about the future role of older international security models in Africa. That is why this moment matters beyond Mali. It touches the broader balance of influence inside West Africa itself. The concern now is not whether AES can launch one operation. The concern is whether it is building a military system capable of repeating this kind of response again and again under growing pressure. No figure represents the new political mood inside the Sahel more strongly than Captain Ibrahim Traore. To many supporters across Africa, he symbolizes a generation that no longer wants the continent's security future designed somewhere else. His speeches, public image, and political messaging consistently focus on sovereignty, self-reliance, and the idea that African nations must develop the ability to defend themselves without permanent dependence on outside powers. That message connects deeply inside the Sahel. Because for many people in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, years of international military involvement did not bring the level of stability they had hoped for. Violence expanded. Armed groups adapted. Entire communities continued to live under insecurity. As frustration grew, leaders like Ibrahim Traore began presenting a different vision, a vision where African states cooperate directly with one another, share intelligence, coordinate military action, and respond to threats using structures controlled inside the region itself. That is one reason the Alliance of Sahel States carries emotional weight far beyond military strategy. To supporters, AES is not simply a security pact. It represents dignity, independence, and the belief that African nations should have the power to make urgent security decisions without waiting for approval from distant capitals. This is also why Pan-Africanism has become closely connected to the image of AES. Many young Africans now see the alliance as proof that regional cooperation can move beyond speeches and become operational reality. But there is also an important counter-argument. Symbols alone cannot stabilize a region. Strong speeches cannot replace logistics, training, intelligence networks, or economic resilience. If security conditions fail to improve over time, public enthusiasm could face serious pressure. And that may become the greatest challenge facing Ibrahim Traore and the broader AES project. Inspiration can unite people, but only long-term results can transform a powerful symbol into lasting history. The rise of the Alliance of Sahel States has triggered mixed reactions far beyond West Africa. Supporters describe AES as a necessary step toward African security independence. Critics, especially in parts of the Western political and media landscape, see something far more concerning. One major criticism focuses on military rule. Western governments and international organizations have repeatedly warned that prolonged military leadership could weaken democratic institutions inside Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Others fear that intensified regional military operations could increase instability